You may experience some of the following sensations: hollow or twisting pain in the stomach, tightness in the chest, tightness and pain in the throat, sensitivity to noise, breathlessness, disturbed sleep, poor concentration, and lack of energy.
I want to, in this project, find a new language, talk about grief in a kind of like digital age. How do you move these topics from a counselling room where it's safe? Why is it only in that space where it suddenly becomes possible to talk about a dead person?
Because it's very difficult, I guess, to show emotions. Facing your own mortality, which I think is a big part of it. It brings to people's realisation that they're not immortal, that one day they might die, and that there's nothing, that's never going to happen to me. But when you're confronted it from a close friend or family member, you think, this could happen to me. This is a reality.
Yeah.
Just trying to think of my first experience with death. It was Granddad, and we'd just gone back to Ghana. He died about 3 weeks after. And I remember that we were upstairs, all 4 of us children, and no one came and talked to us about it. But yet there were people wailing downstairs.
To whom it may concern, I'm a student at the Royal College of Art on a master's programme entitled Digital Direction. So I'm exploring ideas about death and bereavement for my final project. So I was wondering if I could arrange an interview with someone from the charity about the sort of support you offer to people going through the bereavement process. I don't really know what the outcome will be, if I'm honest, but I kind of want to think about how we might imagine a better conversation around grief. Please feel free to get in touch with me should you have any questions. Warm regards, Gabrielle McGuinness.
I work at the Marie Curie Hospice in the West Midlands. I lead the adult bereavement support and counselling service. What do you expect to find in a hospice? Dead people. What's your image of a hospice? It'll be dark, gloomy, serious, where in fact it's the opposite. You're alive until you die, and hospice care is all about living until you die. Pre-death, we support the patients and their families in accepting the news that this patient is now going to die. Tend to find that the patient is very accepting of their diagnosis. Families are on a different page. And then post-death, we support the relatives of those patients that have died. The role is about me, if you like, mopping up the aftermath of they've been told that news, even though they've already been told it. Maybe they've been told that they're coming to a hospice to die. When they actually hear that it really is happening now, and we expect it in the next few days, it's like, I can't pretend anymore. That makes it so raw. I find pre-death relatives don't want to access this support. When I talk to them about that, they'll say, I need to be strong, I need to keep it all together, I can't afford to break down now, I need to be strong for the patient. They're afraid that if they let all their emotions go before the patient dies, they'll never put it all back in to be strong in front of them. People do go through way into adulthood because a serious illness hasn't struck a family yet. So when I've seen somebody now, after the person has died and it's been the first death, they're so shocked that it wasn't like a film. It wasn't that the person stayed awake till the last moment saying really profound things. They were in a coma for a few days before, or they were really agitated, or they were delirious and didn't know me. That they find that before we can even get to the grief. We just have to work our way through that. Loss happens to us all in life, but it goes unrecognised, apart from, of course, the ultimate one is the death of someone or ourselves. But redundancy or divorce, the ones that make us think of loss. So loss touches us all, but it goes unrecognised until the ultimate one.
So Cruise Bereavement Care is one of the largest bereavement charities. This year we're celebrating our 60th anniversary. We're here to support people who have been affected by the death of someone. And it can be immediately after someone's died, or it can be years, decades. Sometimes people contact us 20 or 30 years, after a bereavement because they feel they need to talk about it. But generally we find that people don't like to talk about death. People prefer to use terms like passed away or no longer here or gone to heaven rather than using direct language like death or died. So we find that a lot, especially on social media, but also just generally when people are talking about a bereavement. Because I think it's really important that we are really direct, and also especially when talking to children, and it's really important for them that we do use direct language so that there's no confusion or misunderstanding. While it can be quite devastating for the child because they might not fully understand actually that somebody has died, they might just think, they've gone away for a period of time and they'll come back. Clearly there is an issue there because people just don't like talking about it, even though in reality, it's something that's going to affect us all at some point in our lives.
England were very death denying. People don't know how to grieve now because they don't witness it, they don't see it, which is why it's so important to get into schools. If it's spoken about openly in schools from a very young age, those children will go home and talk to mommy and daddy about it, who may shut them down. But, those children are going to grow up to be adolescents and adults who will carry on openly talking about it. So we've got to start there.
And I think also people are worried about offending or upsetting, and they're not quite sure how people will respond. Their friends ignore them or don't know what to say. So I think until that changes, people won't be able to open up. But I think generally, children, young people like the opportunity to talk about their experience. You don't need to notify the school that you have been bereaved, and there's no way of tracking that information either. We just don't know how many children are affected by bereavement at school. We're currently working with the Department for Education to try and resolve that issue. Then teachers would be in a much better position to support pupils, and then they can also go on bereavement training. I think maybe more work needs to be done around pre-bereavement. I mean, it's difficult, isn't it? I think if you know someone's going to die, then you can actively seek out charities like ours. But actually, if the death is quite sudden or quite traumatic and you're not expecting it, then you haven't really had that time to do any research. And I think that all comes back down to the fact that we just don't talk about it. There's still so much stigma surrounding it.
I work for the Coroner's Court Support Service. So we've been going since 2003. Our founder started the organisation from a very personal experience of attending an inquest into the death of a family member. When we meet them for the first time on the day when they come to the inquest, that's much more difficult because we have a finite amount of time to support them. And often it is about, there are 4 very important but very limited questions that the coroner is entitled to explore and inquire into, and that's who has died, when, where, and how they came about their death. People are in extremely difficult circumstances when they are thrown into the inquest process. And because not much is sort of publicised about inquests and coroners and the work that they do, it's very much a behind closed doors sort of activity that not many people understand. So we're trying to give the same explanation as they've probably already had from the coroner's officer, but we're doing it in such a way that it's a supportive and empathic way of doing it to make that person a person as opposed to a process.
Grief is a process. It has to be gone through for you to, for the want of a better word, heal, to accept. But we've almost unconsciously learned how to put a pause button on it because we keep ourselves busy, we go back to work and there's family and study and but this process has to be gone through. So if you press the pause button now, it might be 5, 6, 7, 10 years time, something else will happen and you might have a very unusual reaction to that. Probably with every client post-death, they'll say, I can't remember happy times. What's vivid is the illness, the death. I can't remember that life before. The unconscious mind needs to work through the minutiae of the illness and the death, and once it's done that, it will let it go. Because before they can remember the life of the person, they have to work through the pain of the illness and the death. If you don't work your way through it and you let your unconscious mind work through the vividness of it, it's got to hang on to it, which is why, you end up 5 years' time that it's still being so raw. I find for a lot of patients, when you really talk to them, what are they afraid of? Number one, they're always afraid that they're going to die in pain. Well, now they're under hospice care, 99.9%, they know they're not going to die in pain. So what's the second thing that you're worried about? It's leaving the family. And that's also connected with who'll remember me? Who'll remember me in 20 years' time? Will my little granddaughter know me? Will my son have moved on? Who's going to remember me after I've died?
And I think the way that we, in our culture, talk about death, like you said, we even find it difficult to say somebody has died. It's about using those terms because we're trying to soften the blow. But in actual fact, we need to hear those words because those are the words that will help your brain to understand that somebody has actually died. Everybody is individual and people will grieve in their own way. How not invincible we all are, because I think we do go along thinking we're all invincible, particularly when we're younger. And then it's only when you have these sorts of knocks that you think, actually, I'm not quite as invincible or my family's not quite as invincible as I first thought they were or I was. I think we need to accept that actually this happens. These sorts of deaths happen, and the more we come to terms with that, the better we will be able to overcome those judgments and assumptions and stereotypes about certain deaths.
Dear Dad, I'm doing this project because I do not want to forget you. I've struggled to say the word suicide or to talk about your death. I'm worried that I will forget about you and all the time we spent together. I punish myself for never thinking to record at least one of the hours we spent on the phone. I can feel memories slip away to the point that I worry that all will remain will be a vision of grey marl jumpers, amber leaf tobacco rollies, and snippets of these extensive phone conversations. I want to remember more about all the times we shared, the things you taught me, the traits I inherited.
I'm Joe Bardeen. I'm the Director of Communications for the Coalition for Radical Life Extension, which puts on the event RadFest and is focused on galvanizing the longevity community. There's taking on a sort of an ageless mindset, which is really important right now because, I mean, you can do things for your health and for your longevity, but if you're sort of thinking old and living old, it's going to be hard to get the benefits. I mean, longevity is like you make good sort of lifestyle choices and you live 5 to 7 years longer. But super longevity is radically altering your lifespan. People are connecting more on this. It used to be so fringe that we were all sort of outliers and we were all kind of in our own little world. Some people still think we're crazy, but there's enough of us and we're making a strong enough connection that the rate of collaboration is really speeding up. And there's even a little bit of money being invested in this. There's no question that this is technology enabled. The rate of advancement of technology makes us see that our own lifespan can be radically extended. It's not that all the technology exists. It's just that we see how fast technology is moving, that we can extrapolate and see that it will be there for us. Now, that's an optimistic view, but it's a legitimate optimistic view.
I took an interest in signing up, and a few years in, somebody said, do you want to come to a meeting and learn how to do it all? And I thought, well, why not? It's free. I did get told by a guy who used to work in the transplant industry, and he said that the trouble is with healthcare at the moment is we're almost, we are ahead of ourselves. So we're really good at keeping people alive, but just not in a good enough state of health. The successful cryonics patient, we always say, is somebody who assumes that tomorrow they will be dead. You've got people with various health issues that say, well, you know, if I can improve things second time around, I can live a proper life next time. And then some people just think, well, I like being alive, so why would I give up on it? There aren't any other options, so let's take this route. No matter how risky, what have I got to lose apart from a few pounds that I can't take with me anyway? We get inquiries from every age, to be honest, but the most typical age for signing up is sort of around 40-ish, because people are old enough to realise that the end is coming and not young enough to think, oh, I'll be fine. I don't can worry about that later.
Curing aging will mature us as a species and will relieve us from the self-centered burden of survival. The anxiety of survival makes us act very irresponsibly, and it makes us much more greedy than we need to be and much more selfish. So I think when we take that survival anxiety out of the equation, and I think we're going to see a change in our capacity to think and feel, because we're not so busy trying to survive or trying to create a legacy and all that. We have PTSD from death. We're traumatized, and it makes people petty and small-minded. If someone else thrives, it's their demise. It's their mortality that's at stake. You know, I think there's a lot of social dysfunction that comes with everybody trying to get their piece of the pie, right? Because it's limited. There's no abundance without abundance of time. And no matter how much you have, it's never enough. I think to object to a future of unlimited lifespans, like, you have to be an apologist for the president. I just don't think it's that good. Like, I think it can be better.
I don't know about loss in general, but in terms of cryonics, it helps to focus on what your relative wants. He's like, oh, well, he wanted to be cremated, but I don't like it. It's weird. Let's bury him. You know, no, I don't want that. Something about not being able to place an obligation on an executor, but it's perhaps the wishes of the deceased that should be seen as paramount. That kind of wording. We usually get a phone call or an email with a sort of loose inquiry. Some people have no idea what they're doing or what it's going to cost or anything. I say you get quite a lot of people that make an inquiry and quite fancy it, but just it takes quite a lot of effort and they just haven't got the motivation to do it. Once they've decided they're going to do it, they've got to make arrangements with a storage provider, which will be in the States or in Russia. They've got to sign a contract with them, and they've got to arrange funding, which is either prepaying or paying with life insurance. Life insurance is more common for obvious reasons because it's spreading the cost out and it's actually more cost effective. The only risk is that obviously you're relying on someone else to pay out. And if there's some technical flaw with your arrangements, that may not happen. That's about it, really. You just have to make sure your relatives know, your doctor knows, all that kind of stuff. Although some people seem to think their will must be really specific, but it doesn't have to be, because by the time your will is read, you'll have left the country anyway in a lovely box packed in dry ice. It's just a question of pay your money every month, and when you're on your last legs, make sure you call before you're going to drop dead.
There is nothing cathartic to thinking about death every day, as I have learned from doing this project. I lost my father to suicide when I was 16. From that moment on, I knew I would never quite be as I was before. Sure enough, it has felt as though I've been half under the surface of water ever since, a feeling which resurfaced with extra fervour in recent months. And so it all begs the question, why should we think more about grief then, if it's so painful? Why cast that dark cloud over everyone until they actually need to think about it? Which I guess is all true. But it is also denial.
I think in the beginning, when I was 17, I was stopping up about it, talking about it was this huge wave of relief. And now I talk about my mum a lot more, so I don't feel like those moments don't sort of impact me in that way anymore. My mother died when I was 17. Her stoicism is exemplified by the fact that she never told really anyone. And she said, the week before she died, she was in hospital, and she sort of just said, I'm not feeling great. And looking back on it now, clearly not feeling great. She was at death's door. She never said she was scared or anything like that. I think she berated herself because she is a doctor and she didn't catch it. Sort of a month after my mum died, I felt really sad and down, but I very much compartmentalised my life and I wasn't really spoken to about it. So under the guise of saying it was for me, the girls at my school just didn't speak to me about it. And they said, we thought you didn't want to speak about it. And I just think anyone who knows about death knows that even the person doesn't seem like they want to talk about it, they absolutely have to talk about it. So I just was sort of left alone the next few months and just felt numb and sad, and my family didn't really talk much about it because there's a sense of being an English stoic family.
I think now the concept of a memorial website is so normal and so familiar and understood that why would somebody send in a message to say, wow, thank you for your service? People kind of expect it to be there. We just wanted to be a memorial website and help people remember online. And it became painfully clear that if we just carried on like that, we would eventually become irrelevant as social networks would become dominant. So we did deliberately look for a niche, which is fundraising and memory and working with funeral directors and charities. There's a blend of remembrance and fundraising, and it wasn't our initial strategy because there was no strategy, I suppose. One of the ideas behind Much Loved is that we only take enough data that we need to enable people to set up the site. People go to online memorials needing help. Bereavement is something that you can't avoid. It's an inevitable part of life, and it feels a bit sad if the only services out there for you are those which are going to require taking your data. There should be a space in bereavement for pure charitable support.
We're talking about the interface between trauma and the more cognitive part of processing that grief. But you can't do that cognitive part of processing because of the way we understand how our brain works now. And when you experience trauma like this, you go into survival mode. Not long after I was born, I was 4 when my mother died of breast cancer, and 9 when my father died of some heart problem. So my research started very early on. Then, unsurprisingly, as we discussed earlier, moved into the helping profession. And as a wounded healer, I realised I had some really good skills and a deep level of understanding, a deep level of empathy. And my route has been a therapeutic route, and the route has been focused on creative therapies, because that's what I felt you lost as a child, the ability to play. And you lose that ability to play for various reasons. You have to grow up very quickly because, for example, the world became very scary. And our work as bereaved kids is to be open and honest about that, which is, I am a better person, but I still wish it hadn't happened. And that's the interface between the traumatic work, which is if you took the whole caboodle inside, you would take your own life.
In the early days, we just had tributes lasting for 10 years. The idea being that they would close down after 10 years. But actually, we found that almost the other way around, that people were not happy with the idea that the page wouldn't last forever. Facilitating conversation and facilitating a longer grief process is at the heart of the benefits of much loved lending, the concept of dealing with the shock of grief, moving more across onto sort of life history, life stories, and a record of somebody. We've been going for a long time, and hopefully most of those scenarios and needs, particularly in terms of privacy and access, we've built and developed the software so we can accommodate. Part of the reason for setting up Much Loved was wanting to create something which maybe was needed more because of the reserved British sense. In my own personal experience, brother and mum in the 1990s, I kind of experienced it. And it's not just other people not talking about it or people being very awkward about it. I realised it was as much me as well.
Since my mum died, I've been happier than I've ever been. Not because she died, but because I think a death does reset your whole attitude to life. My grief now is more sadness about just missing her, as you miss anyone who's died, and also feeling sad about the fact that she won't be at weddings, family events like that. And then the other thing I miss is just a mother's love. The thing that really sort of started scaring me is just the fact that the memories do fade, and the more you sort of grasp at memories, the more they slip away. And I think that's what I found really difficult. But you have to hang on to sort of how they made you feel and what you loved about them. I think the reality for most people is the memories start going as soon as almost instantly. You don't know if you sort of fabricated this image in your mind, but either way it feels totally real, so it makes sense. That 100% happened. I definitely can't recall a specific moment, but it feels incredibly real. So I think you're right. And that's where it's the blur between memory and sort of the creation that you make. And even if that is a fabricated memory, it doesn't feel any less true. I feel like I very much just have learned to live, you don't really get over it because it is just a loss. I don't really get over any loss, really. But I've fully learned to live with it now.
So the idea that you'd be working through your grief in an upward way, going round the spiral rather than going back. And you did the best you could at the time, and you were a child. So thinking about a picture of the upward spiral of grief, and the initial phase one of the trauma, it's got a black hole in the beginning. The word acceptance is in the popular domain. And there are times when you never want to accept what's happened. So we prefer in the spiral of grief to add the word adjustment. And when we're trying to process the grief, a young person with the experience of early premature death is that actually you don't have enough words. You're interested in talking about grief. It is about talking, but it's also about connecting your thoughts, feelings, and behaviours.
As we cross into the new year, there are those of us looking back at its path, retracing its footsteps for those it left behind. I cannot believe over 6 years has passed. It will get easier, they say. Give it time. And for a while, that time washes past you without you really flowing with it.
I mean, you've had a lot in your little life, really, your short life, really, to deal with. And you've done extremely well, and I'm so proud of you.